Grandma's Kisses is an episode of SpongeBob that explores themes of maturity, family, and self-identity. But even with these deep themes, this episode is often seen in a pretty negative light. Why is this episode so disliked? Does it deserve this reputation? Let's take a look at Grandma's Kisses and ask ourselves if it deserved to be in pre-movie SpongeBob. So, Grandma's Kisses revolves around SpongeBob undergoing an inner conflict between his desire to be seen as an adult and the more childish activities he enjoys with his grandmother, with his character arc being about learning that these things do not have to be in conflict with each other and that you can have both. Right off the bat, I will say that this is a much more kids show lesson than other episodes. SpongeBob's lessons can often be pretty timeless in terms of what age they'd be most relevant. Take, for example, an episode like Big Pink Loser, which has a lesson revolving around not comparing yourself too much to others, something kids and adults struggle with on mostly equal footing. Grandma's Kisses, on the other hand, is a lesson that is more skewed specifically to kids and more narrowly boys, probably around ages 9 to 13, as those ages are where one would most likely encounter the same inner conflict that SpongeBob does in the episode. This isn't to say that an adult couldn't relate to this episode at all, like you can be an adult and enjoy more childish things like Nintendo games and Squishmallows, or you could try to make a living talking about SpongeBob online. Hey, but even though all ages could relate to this, the lesson is definitely skewed more towards that tween era of childhood, and that could, on a subconscious level, lower how much the narrative means to you when you rewatch the episode in adulthood. Now, this is not me criticizing the episode. It's okay for a show like this to have a lesson geared more towards kids. In fact, I think it's important that it does, because I'm sure a lot of kids out there really needed this lesson. So I'm glad the SpongeBob writers didn't abstain from this lesson just because it's more of a childhood lesson. So the dislike for this episode comes down to the way three entities are written to behave: the background fish, Patrick, and SpongeBob himself. Let's go over each of these and see if the criticisms are justified. Criticism 1. The background fish are too mean. The role of the background fish in the story revolves around bullying SpongeBob because he has a kiss mark on his forehead from his grandmother. Squidward kind of spearheads this bullying, but I think the consensus is that Squidward is more in character for teasing SpongeBob, but the background fish are completely out of line, joining in to bully who, to them, is just some minimum wage worker. SpongeBob later refers to them as
the guys down at the Krusty Krab,
almost like they're a group of friends or something and not, just customers, which I guess adds a little more of a personal relationship. It implies to me that these people are Krusty Krab regulars who see SpongeBob all the time and have a bit more of a rapport with him, which does make sense because these are recurring background fish. So in most kids shows, the main character is usually a child who goes to school. SpongeBob sets itself apart from these other shows by having SpongeBob's age be ambiguous, not exactly treating him as a kid or adult, and having his main setting be a workplace and not a school. The idea of a main character in a kids show going to school was so universal back in the day that boating school as a setting only exists as a compromise with the execs who were afraid of breaking that established norm. While most of the time SpongeBob not following the kid in school standard helps set it apart from other similar shows, Grandma's Kisses is one of those episodes where this unorthodox setting presented a bit more of a writing challenge. If this were the plot of an episode in any other show, the main character would have been bullied by their classmates, which would have made a lot more sense than adult restaurant patrons. In creating this episode, the writers came up against this writing challenge that wouldn't have even been a problem had this been a normal show, but their solution was to simply write the scene where the adult background characters bully SpongeBob the way children would. This is probably why people don't like this scene, and I do see why. It's clearly a situation that doesn't fit the setting or the characters. Perhaps this could have been fixed if SpongeBob simply went to boating school instead of the Krusty Krab, but 1, the boating school students are also adults, so same problem, and 2, the Krusty Krab is much more of SpongeBob's happy place as compared to boating school, so SpongeBob not feeling comfortable there does have more of an impact. Really, the best way to fix this would have been to simply tone down the bullying from the background fish. Maybe have them pull a few jabs at SpongeBob about the kisses, but not resort to this childish ganging up. If this were how the scene was written, then it could be more focused on SpongeBob overreacting to what is happening, rather than it being that these people are genuinely bullying him. After all, a lot of times, someone feels insecure about something mostly because of what's going on in their own head, and not because of an external force. I almost didn't want to propose this solution because I was initially concerned that if the bullying were toned down, then the episode wouldn't be addressing actual bullying, which is something that could really happen to a kid, and shows like this addressing it can be a big help of them feeling less alone. However, the narrative of Grandma's Kisses isn't about bullying. Its conclusion doesn't revolve around SpongeBob getting them to stop bullying him, so since the episode doesn't address how to deal with bullying anyway, as it's more focused on SpongeBob's internal conflict, maybe it would have been better if it were simply teasing misinterpreted as bullying. Criticism 2. Patrick is too selfish. After the fiasco at the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob and Patrick make a plan for them to act manlier the next time he sees his grandmother. This plan completely backfires when Patrick immediately reverts back to acting childish at the first temptation of cookies. This is the other big criticism of the episode. People don't like that Patrick is a bad friend here, but I don't know. I think it might be possible that the reason people are uncomfortable with this scene is because they're traumatized by Patrick's behavior in later seasons, which makes them sensitive to even relatively mild bad actions. Also, the point of the episode is that Patrick is right. It's okay to be childish sometimes. SpongeBob makes that very same change in his own attitude at the end of the episode, so should we really judge Patrick for making the exact same choice but earlier? Maybe you can say Patrick is not being a good friend because he didn't keep his word about acting mature with SpongeBob, and that's definitely true. But Patrick's bad friendness here is believable by even the better standards of his character, and him being a bad friend does help drive the plot and provide a contrast for SpongeBob's attempt at manliness. By having Patrick give in to being childish immediately, we can see what SpongeBob is missing out on. For this reason, I think the actions of Patrick in this episode do constitute good writing, because they are consistent with his character and drive the plot and theme. Criticism 3. SpongeBob is too childish. This brings me to the third and final criticism of Grandma's Kisses, SpongeBob's crash out. Many critics of the episode have found themselves uncomfortable with the amount of crying and some of the things that SpongeBob says he wants to do.
Milky, I want to wear tighties.
Yeah, this is the criticism I agree with the most. The part that I don't mind is the crying itself, because saying it's okay to cry is a positive message, and SpongeBob's crying is so cartoonish that it buffers us from feeling uncomfortable. So before this moment, the term baby is thrown around a lot, but when it's said, the audience can colloquially understand it as a way of referring to being childish, instead of being a literal baby. And look, if that's your thing in your personal life, no shame to you, but the message of the episode is not you can choose to act like a literal baby in the privacy of your own home. It's a commentary on the social standards we place on people, especially young men, as they grow up. And up until this point, a young guy who's going through a similar situation might really have been relating to SpongeBob and would be nearly in the process of changing their perspective to a much more mature outlook of understanding the balance between growing up and embracing childhood. And then SpongeBob said "didies" and lesson ruined. I agree with Squidward now. It's astounding how much only 2 little lines could completely undermine the entire story, and they did it for nothing. These lines aren't even that funny. Why destroy your message over it? It's a true, rare low point for pre-movie SpongeBob. A lot of viewers like to think of Grandma's Kisses as a fully mid-episode, a season 6 episode disguised as a season 2 episode. But the real tragedy of Grandma's Kisses is that it really is as high quality as other pre-movie episodes, but undermines itself with a few small but crucial bad decisions. I do think that a big reason that episodes like Grandma's Kisses are starting to get some criticism is because there's so much negativity towards modern SpongeBob episodes that it's causing some of us to want to look critically at the episodes that we put on a pedestal and say, now hold on. And overall, I think this is a good attitude. Modern SpongeBob episodes can be good. Classic episodes can have glaring flaws. Grandma's Kisses is an interesting case study because it presents an episode of a show that is otherwise really well done, but with only a few little flaws, is brought down in the minds of some people to the same level as episodes that have dozens of flaws. It's interesting to look at how something as simple as having these background characters be too rude or one weird line about acting like a baby can bring something that is otherwise so good so far down. But that's the house of cards of story that writers build. The real reason Grandma's Kisses is disliked. So I think it's clear that one of the biggest problems audiences have with Grandma's Kisses is the fact that they are uncomfortable with SpongeBob and Patrick acting like babies. But really, this episode isn't all that guilty of that. Sure, if you really look deeply at those few moments of SpongeBob in the end, you can argue they cross just a little bit of a baby line. But I want to pose this question. If across the entire series, SpongeBob didn't become more childish, if this moment was the most babyish he ever was across this show's now 2.5-decade run, would it really have stood out? See, I think that some later depictions of SpongeBob and Patrick, where they are much more babyish, have sullied our view of the show so much that we're sensitive to much more benign portrayals of it back in season 2. Take, for example, the opening of The Many Faces of Squidward, where SpongeBob and Patrick annoy Squidward by singing baby nursery rhymes. Which, by the way, I actually did a video where I rewrote Many Faces of Squidward into a much better episode. You should check it out. But anyway, when later episodes do things like having SpongeBob and Patrick babble baby nursery rhymes, it affects our view of the characters across the entire series. This is why it's so bad that the writers kept screwing up episodes ever since the first movie premiered. The show doesn't exist in a vacuum. Things you do in later seasons can affect how you view early seasons. I talked about this before with concepts like Nosferatu and the Imagination Box, which both have sequel episodes that completely ruin their original concepts. When I watch Graveyard Shift or Idiot Box, I have to actively ignore their concept-destroying sequel episodes. I have to create my own canon in order to enjoy them, and sure, I can do that, it's a free country, but that attitude can only go so far. I think the same thing happened with Grandma's Kisses, but it's even worse because we don't even actively know that we're judging it for this reason. I think, in a vacuum, this episode is actually pretty benign, but because some of the choices it made in its writing are reminiscent of some of the worst elements of future episodes, it affects our perception. I want to bring up one episode that I think is an apt comparison. Squid Baby. No, this is important for the discussion, I promise. I know, I'm sorry, I have to talk about Squid Baby. So, Squid Baby has some similarities to Grandma's Kisses, in the sense that both stories revolve around themes of maturity and address the concept of acting childish. But while Grandma's Kisses is nuanced, reserved, deities notwithstanding, and overall a deep analysis of something that just about every young person feels at some point in their life, Squid Baby is not any of those things. The inciting incident of Squid Baby is that Squidward hits his head while yelling at SpongeBob and Patrick for acting like babies and ends up with a condition where he acts like a baby. So the episode seems to be trying to teach a lesson about not acting too much like a baby, like SpongeBob and Patrick are acting like babies. Well, now they have to take care of a baby, and in doing that, they learn to be more mature. That actually isn't a bad story. However, none of this story can really resonate with the audience because we spend the entire episode just cringing and feeling deeply uncomfortable at the portrayal of an adult man being reduced to acting like a baby due to a head injury. When your audience is uncomfortable, it completely undermines any story that you want to tell. But I do want to acknowledge the difficulty the Squid Baby writers were up against when making this episode. Now, maybe they just could have shelved this episode idea and never done it, but if you think deeper, the thing they are commenting on, the concept of people who aren't babies acting like babies, or even just the concept of people who should be acting mature, not acting mature, the idea that there's something wrong with that and worth learning to change about that, I do think that is a lesson worth teaching in a kid's show. Now, it's not a lesson that needed moments like this in order to teach it, but it is an important lesson nonetheless. And if the writers took more subtle, more nuanced approaches to their story, like Grandma's Kisses did, they would have been able to guide their audience through a concept they might otherwise find uncomfortable. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. If you want to support the channel, I've got a Patreon as well as channel memberships. Also, check out my gaming channel. I've done some videos about the SpongeBob video games over there, like this one about the SpongeBob movie GBA game and how it compares to the film. You should really check it out.